I'm just so glad Bitcoin exists because the world could be a very messed up, dark place without it.
Since 1913, with the establishment of the Federal Reserve in the United States, this has been something where governments and central bankers have wanted this ability to effectively make themselves gods by being able to create money out of thin air.
The fiat system is so corrupt. It's heading one way. It's insurmountable debt upon insurmountable debt. The only way you can fix it is to opt into another system and start building within that new system, which is Bitcoin, which is an equity-based system as opposed to a debt-based system.
Bitcoin's something that's rooted in honesty. It's rooted in truth. It's rooted in just publicly displaying every transaction that's ever existed. You can't BS with it.
Bitcoin is a tool that I believe God has given us. It restores my faith in humanity, and it restores my faith in that God wants to give us good things and wants us to thrive and prosper and have humans flourish. And I believe that can happen on a Bitcoin standard.
If value can be created by governments and central bankers out of thin air, then functionally they are the gods of the system. And if they are able to use that money to subsidize any idea, then you're going to have signal confusion.
Thank God for Bitcoin. Maybe a first fun question. Why do we have to thank God for Bitcoin?
I'll let Jordan take that one.
Yeah. So this is, thank God for Bitcoin. Again, it's hilarious because when we first started looking for names for the book, this is 2020 where, COVID's going on. And so we're just on a Zoom call going over names, among other things, with the book. And I just remember I was the only person in vocational ministry at the time. I was working as a pastor and living in Uruguay. And I just remember hearing Thank God for Bitcoin and thinking, well, at least we know it won't be that. Whatever we named the book, it won't be Thank God for Bitcoin. And then just the more that we thought about it, the more I was like, man, it really is kind of catchy. And again, I think the spirit behind it is there's a verse in the book of James that says every good and perfect gift is from above, and shining down from the Father of lights. It's talking about God, and so like God is the origin of all good gifts. And so if Bitcoin is a good gift, obviously we credit Satoshi with coming up with the ideas, but to whom do we give credit for Satoshi having those ideas and having a body with which to process those ideas and a body with which to put those ideas into plan. And so that's kind of why we want to thank God for Bitcoin. We want to credit him with as being the giver of all gifts, including the ideas behind Bitcoin.
And it's funny how often it comes up because I'll just be listening to podcasts or I'll be in conversations with people about Bitcoin myself, and you'll just kind of go down into this really dark hole talking about the fiat system and where we're going, and it's just things just look really dark, and then you just kind of breathe a sigh like, oh, thank God for Bitcoin. I'm just so glad Bitcoin exists because the world could be a very messed up, dark place without it.
Yeah. In that sense, we also have to thank God for fiat then, I guess.
No. Yeah. This is a great conversation.
The corruption of money.
Yeah. Again, how do you give credit? Because again, this is the thing is there's people who get cancer in the world. There's people who die in the world. And so how do you give God credit for certain things and not for others? And I think this is one of these things where, God he's got a will. He's got something that he desires the world to look like. And then obviously people have their own wills. And so the history of the world is this, cosmic battle of, again, somebody asked Jesus, how do we pray? Or, his disciples asked him to teach them to pray. And Jesus, a central component of the prayer was that you pray and ask God, may your kingdom come and your will be done. And so that's instead of necessarily our will being done and our will being done and our kingdom coming. And so there's one of these things. This is a constant battle of, whose will is ultimately going to be done in the world. And so obviously since 1913, with the establishment of the Federal Reserve in the United States, this has been something where, governments and central bankers have wanted this ability to effectively make themselves gods by being able to create money out of thin air. And so again, there's a real sense in which fiat money allows governments and central banks to be gods. They can fund and subsidize any ideas or programs or whatever that they want. And so, again, while that might be true, and while God allowed that to happen, that's a different thing than saying this is what fiat currency and the type of things that it subsidizes is something that is aligned with the revealed way that God wants the world to work.
Interesting. It's almost like By the way, like religion is also interesting for me. The word I recently learned, religion is the coming together or something like that. I forgot the exact meaning, but like religion in itself just means like a community coming together. And when you press it down to that definition, a lot of things can be a religion. And Bitcoin has a lot of those, how should I say, a lot of those religious aspects to it. There's like a mythical figure with Satoshi Nakamoto. There are those meetups. We meet at certain points. We come together. I would not say we pray to Satoshi Nakamoto or we pray to the blockchain. But when you come to events like the halving and how is it celebrated and those things, there are some religious aspects in Bitcoin, even without the comparisons and even without the connections to actual religions. It's really interesting to think about that for me.
Yeah, I think, and Dan, you can add on to this too. Like, I think like one of the things you see this question of like what is religion and like what is religious, and for a lot of us, we haven't been trained with or raised with formalized religious training, and so we're trained to think about, or we're just kind of enculturated to think about religion as this weird thing that's over there that we've kind of mostly rejected as a society. We've kind of moved past it. But again, when you really get down to this, asking this question of, what is religion and like, what is, what kind of systems, what parts of life is faith necessary and faith required in? And you start to realize that, literally every aspect of our life is grounded in faith in something. There's, in the gap of places where we don't have personal firsthand knowledge, we're depending on faith. And so relationships are prefaced upon faith. Again, as a child, you're completely dependent upon your parents to act in your best interest. And sometimes that doesn't work, or, in some cases, again, it's not your parents, it's your grandparents or whatever. But trust is this part of being human. And so we can't get away from that. And so, obviously when you get down to looking at, religions, these things are prefaced upon, at least in the case of Christianity and many of these other things, like they're rooted in history. In the scriptures, there's places that we know existed, and there's places where we can, demonstrate, this ruler that's talked about here also, we can verify from normal history that this also existed. And so, so I think that it's something that we're not accustomed to thinking about in this sense. I also think that, again, you're right. Like Bitcoin has its own holidays. And so the word holiday comes from the word holy, like from the two words holy days. These are days that were set apart because they had important significance. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that, basically, I believe it was John Calvin. Calvin who talks about the heart being an idol factory. And so basically we were created to worship. This is a way that God hardwired us. And so it's not a question of whether or not we'll worship something. It's which thing or which entity that we'll worship. And so, again, we see that there are people who worship Bitcoin. And again, we understand it to a point, but we want to, especially in this book, we talk about, money broadly and Bitcoin in particular is a great tool. And so we want to wield the tool toward the ends for which tools are created, which is always in service of some other mission, rather than seeing the tool as an end in of itself to worship and to glory in the tool.
Interesting. It's for me, it's also interesting what you talked about, the freedom and the dependency on others, because when you freedom doesn't mean you have no dependencies on other people, because then you're not free. You basically have to live in the woods with no other beings, and you have to kill your own animals and do all those stuff if you really want to be completely free. And I think that's not freedom. Like if you want to have maximum freedom, you have to find the balance of being dependent in the right areas in your life and being independent in the right areas in your life. It's a really interesting discussion of what freedom is really like and what faith faith and trust in others is looking like. Because even with my podcast now, I'm currently in the works of onboarding my first employee. I have to have the faith and the trust that that we can work together, and that we build on a similar vision for the podcast. So that's super interesting. Also for you, because you were both writing on the book, working together can be complicated, can be challenging, but I think also really, really rewarding. How was it to write the book together?
It was good. Yeah, it was good. We definitely had to make some adjustments along the way. I'll tell the story. So this is the book here, The Gospel According to Bitcoin, and it's 21 meditations. We on the outset, we knew that we had to get 21 different chapters in there, just because, it's Bitcoin's magic number. And we had a whole bunch in mind. And so Jordan had a bunch in mind. I had a bunch in mind. And so we just started writing. And when was it, Jordan? It was, I think, earlier this year, maybe in March or something, when we were trying to get this ready to launch by Bitcoin 24, last year, by Bitcoin 24 in Nashville, at the TGFB conference. And our editor comes back to us and says, guys, you can't publish the book yet. You're writing two different books. And so we realized that, like, all the chapters I was writing were really kind of designed as more of like a meditation format, like almost like devotional style of someone like easy access to someone who maybe isn't a Christian, who could get into and see like a principle of Bitcoin, how that's reflected in Christianity, and kind of learn something from that. Whereas Jordan was doing kind of more a deep dive philosophically into the nature of money itself, and how that connects with Christianity. And so it ended up being just two different styles. And so we ended up having to separate those out. And so this book it has more of the chapters that I wrote. And I'm hoping that at some point Jordan will also have another book that maybe I can contribute to as well. That'll be more kind of the philosophy of money and theology of money as well.
So that there's the 21 meditation, the gospel according to Bitcoin. There's thank God for Bitcoin. How many books, just to get an overview of what we are talking about?
There's two different books.
Yeah, so there's two different books. Yeah, we published Thank God for Bitcoin. This is a different group of people. Me and 7 other people published Thank God for Bitcoin in 2021, beginning of 2021. And then this, The Gospel According to Bitcoin, is kind of our second book that TGFB has published. Yeah, you can go find it on Amazon, or we actually need Amazon purchases and Amazon reviews. We've gotten a bunch of orders from our website, which is usually it's the opposite. But yeah, so if you want to support it, go get it there. But yeah, I think it's one of these things where, again, the kind of the summary of why the two different books. Thank God for Bitcoin is designed to help a broadly Christian audience kind of, grok Bitcoin. Why does this matter? Why do we think that Christians should care about these things? Again, not necessarily in unique ways. Like, it's not saying, this other people, it matters more to Christians about Bitcoin. That's not what we're saying at all. It's just, we're tailoring the message of trying to help a specific audience understand Bitcoin. And so in the same way that when you go fishing, you use particular bait to catch particular fish, we kind of want to do the same thing with the specific arguments that we chose to help Christians make sense of Bitcoin. So then with the gospel according to Bitcoin, it was more created to, okay, so again, kind of do the opposite, which is, all right, we have a lot of people who crazy things start happening when you start getting into Bitcoin and you start getting into a rooted understanding of the role of energy in the world and the role of energy in the formation of money. You start to look at the world and start to look at a lot of things differently than you did before. And so one of these things is religion. You start looking at religion differently. And so we have seen, numerous people who were the farthest thing from religious people. And then they get into Bitcoin, and within a few years, they either become Christians outright, or they at least are on the road and considering things that they never, would have thought about, they never would have imagined themselves thinking about. And so I think part of it is you have these people who, they're like, they come through, they go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and they realize, man, I was ignorant to something that is so central to how the world works, that, and if I was so wrong and unaware of what was, what's actually going on in that realm, what are some other realms within my life and within the world that maybe I've totally, dismissed or thought were ridiculous, that maybe I'm willing to kind of, lend them a second opportunity. I'm willing to kind of hear them out. And so I think that's part of what's going on. And so we wrote the Gospel According to Bitcoin, for maybe people who are, you're sold on Bitcoin, but maybe you've got questions. You're like, why are there so many, and I don't know what this looks like in your context, but why are there so many people who are becoming Christian and who are Christians who are into Bitcoin? Like, wait, this is kind of a phenomenon that a lot of people have recognized, for better or for worse. And so we kind of want to, give from our perspective why it is that as Christians, we see a lot of overlap between kind of the message of the gospel and the way that Bitcoin works in some really odd ways.
It's definitely like that. I see that. I saw it with myself. Before Bitcoin, I stepped out of the church mainly because you have to pay.
Really?
In Austria, there is basically, if you want to be in the church, you also have to pay according to what you can pay.
Oh, okay.
And it's based on your salary. And I was like, hey, that's another tax. Like, why should I do that?
So it's like a formal agreement. Like, you have to sign like a formal agreement.
Yes, it's not as integrated as in Germany. In Germany, it's a form of the salary as a tax. And they directly get it away. You'd never see it on your bank account, and they directly put it to the church. In Austria, it's more of a separate thing where they contact you and you can ask them to reduce it if you explain the situation of like, I got a second baby and I cannot afford to pay something like that. Or you're a student, then you can get exempt. Like if you're a student still till like 25, you get an exempt. But at some point you have to pay. And then the only choice, if you don't want to pay, is to officially step out of the church. Me starting my official career, and I was like, I already pay taxes a lot in Austria. Like, that's the tax I can get rid of. I didn't at all think about the religious aspect and just stepped out of it. That's why I'm officially non-religious. That's what I am. And honestly, with Bitcoin, I'm currently in the process of like rethinking that. It's a long process. It's not something that I'm really passionate about and diving deep in. But the more and more I learn, especially I have 400 Bitcoiners on, there are a lot of Christians in there.
Wow.
And you get influenced by that. So I'm not a fan of the church taking a percentage cut of the salary.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. Is that different in America?
Yeah, it's very different in North America. I live in Canada, and I don't know about you, Jordan, but we're pretty strong separation of church and state over here. And so it's actually like at the church that I attend, you go on our website and it's actually in one of the doctrines, like we believe in the separation of church and state. And so, I remember traveling in Denmark one time, and just it boggled my mind that people actually voted to keep donating to the churches, like to keep having the church being funded by their taxes. Just that the whole concept of that just is, I find mind-boggling, because we have such a distinct separation over here.
Yeah,
so you can just sorry to ask. So you can just donate if you want to. There's no if you earn that and you're in the church, you have to give at least like 1% of your salary or something like that.
That's right. Yeah, it's all free will giving. You give what you want to give.
That's how it's supposed to be. Like I like that more.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah. Again, and it's funny we're talking about this because like this is something I actually have thought about more in the last few years. Because again, America. I mean, Americans, we're not exactly known for just having people just tell us what to do, like for better and for worse. And so so that's definitely at a government level probably wouldn't fly. But again, I think that I could see wisdom in it. Again, provided you do a good job of communicating the whys. And this is part of the why of the situation. And this is part of the thing that I think is very difficult to do. Like you see in the book of Deuteronomy, it talks about you have Moses and he's talking to the people and he's talking to them about the need for them to teach their kids and like explain to their kids. He says to them, when you're walking in the way, or when you're sitting in your house and your kids start asking you questions about why do we do these things, and he just basically talks about, you need to be able to tell them why. Like, tell them why these things, and show them like the consequences of not doing them, and the points that we haven't done things. And so I think that that's a big part of the thing that a lot of us around the world, and a lot of people around the world are going through, is we have these traditions, and we have these things that are even built into our law systems that they were done for a purpose, but they're not, like, the tradition is not being explained. And so then there's a famous example of Chesterton's fence. Have you guys ever heard of this?
Never heard about it.
Okay, so G.K. Chesterton was a British author and just really interesting guy. Wrote a ton of books. His most famous book is called The Everlasting Man, or Orthodoxy is probably his most famous one. But he talks about there's a famous principle called Chesterton's fence, which is, if you find a fence, you shouldn't just remove it because you don't understand why it's there. You should figure out why it was put there, and then you can determine whether or not it's something that ought to be removed. But it's the idea of, you can imagine like Jurassic Park. You're in Jurassic Park, you see this giant fence, and you're like, well, let's just get rid of this, and then you remove it, and then T-Rex comes along and eats you. It's one of these ideas where you want to be slow to just get rid of things that you don't understand. And so, but yeah, I still do think that for a lot of people, and especially in America, like that would be crazy. It would be crazy for people from their perspective to think about the government, forcing them to give, even if you could opt out of it, and even if there were provisions. That's him.
Interesting. Yeah, like that's like, it struck me so badly, and I think if it's forced, it turns off people, and they don't. As with me, I don't even look like, why Christianity, why religious? Like, I didn't even ask those questions, because I was so turned off by the idea that I have to pay for that. Yep. And I was like, but why do I have to pay for that? Like, I don't want to do that. Like, that turns you off so quickly that you don't even come to the question of like, maybe I should do a deeper research. Like, if you force things on, if you force a small kid into something, it's very likely that it wants the exact opposite.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, that's interesting. Just to clarify, because we thank God for Bitcoin, you're doing conferences, you're doing publishing, you have to book. So you're like kind of an organization, and you have to book for that. You have to conference and the meetups, and that's kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, so the meetups is kind of a newer thing, and actually, shout to Samuel. Samuel Coleman he's kind of leading the charge and planning on starting at least he was talking about doing it, starting a TGFB meetup in Austria, I think, or Switzerland. I'm sorry. But yeah, so basically, long story short, we ended up writing the book in 2021. And then about a year passed, and we had way better reception to the book than we ever could have imagined. I think we've sold around like 30,000 copies of the book, which is.
I thought you said 50,000.
Yeah, and I think we were going over this the other day, and I think I don't know where I got that wrong, but I think it's closer to 30. But so we were going over that, and or the book came out. It was really widely received. And then about a year, a little more than a year went by. And Jimmy Song just basically said, hey, we should do like a TGFB conference or something, like a one-day event, maybe in Miami, in 2022, the day before the big Bitcoin conference. And so long story short, I got asked to organize it. And so me and another guy organized it. And in the aftermath of the conference, we had politicians show up. We had, a bunch of different people, about 175 people showed up with about 6 weeks notice. And then in the aftermath, some of the other guys who had written the book, who were all either OG Bitcoiners buying Bitcoin at $5 a coin, or, entrepreneurs who had founded and exited multiple businesses. They basically said, hey, Jordan, if you want to do this full time, if you want to work to, basically create a media company to help, do podcasts and publish other books, and then just go to events, run your own events, and then also go to other conferences to kind of help the broader Christian world understand what Bitcoin is and why it matters and the effects it has on them. We're willing to fund you. And so they gave me a couple years of funding, or a few years of funding. And so that's kind of what we do. We do a bunch of stuff like that. And so again, part of it is publishing as well. So that's where the, publishing this book comes in.
It's amazing the giving mood, generosity of Bitcoiners. I love that. It's also something that kind of connects the Bitcoin community with the Christianity community. I love that.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Really interesting. Will you also do one in Las Vegas coming up?
So yeah, so the thing about Vegas is, this is funny. I mean, like it makes sense in a lot of ways. You're like, so we were talking. We probably got, I would say, 300 or 400 like core people who, you know, like they're pretty actively involved, you know, with us on a regular basis, and it's growing. But so as we were talking about like doing a conference in Vegas, there were like about half of them who were just like, I don't really want to go to Vegas, you know, like it's kind of, it's the name of Vegas, like there's a nickname for it in the United States, and it's Sin City. So like the idea of a Christian conference in Sin City didn't sit well with some people. So now again, from my standpoint, I'm like, yeah, I get that. Like that, you know, there's people who have histories, they have vices, you know, and I mean, if you have somebody who's an alcoholic, then setting them loose on Vegas, you know, maybe it wouldn't be the smartest thing. So anyhow, what we decided to do was we're not going to do our main. We usually do like a 2-day event. So we're not going to do our main 2-day event in Las Vegas. We're going to do an afternoon, evening, like VIP dinner. So the goal is basically get 15 Bitcoin celebrities, get them there, and have about 75 people total. So the goal is to have one Bitcoin celebrity at like a table with 4 or 5 other people. And so then, yeah, just get to be able to be there and hang out with people that you know, and have a really good meal. Talking to a buddy of mine who does really good barbecue, really good like Southern style barbecue, you know, cooked meat and stuff. And so we're gonna fly him out, and he's gonna cook for all of us. So yeah, that's kind of what we're doing this year. But yeah, we in the past we have done our own standalone conferences.
And you mentioned, Jordan, that there's maybe something else in the fall as well, right?
Yeah. So the plan right now is to do either the end of September or early October, do a 2-day event in Nashville. And so that will be much more of the VIP dinner is much more like an insider, like you're already a Bitcoiner, or you want to meet your Bitcoin podcast people who you've been listening to or whatever. And then the other event is much more like, hey, I'm into Bitcoin. I want to invite my, you know, people from my church or my family. I want them to come in and kind of hear like an A to Z, you know, explanation over the course of 2 days about, you know, some of the reasons some of the ways Bitcoin's being used, and some of the reasons why, why we get so excited about it.
Really cool. I want to get into one thing. I mean, that's kind of the first thing I want to get into, but the conversation already developed. Yeah. What are the biblical foundations that align with Bitcoin the most? Like, what are the core values, the core things that you can compare Bitcoin and Christianity with?
Well, there's at least 21 of them. And you can read about it in the book. There's probably a lot of different ways we could tackle this. The one that I love to maybe center on is like, I don't know if you're probably familiar with Jeff Booth, and many of your audience would be familiar with Jeff Booth. He has a saying that he's popularized, the idea that you can't fix the system from within the system. And this idea that, you know, the fiat system is so corrupt, it's heading one way. It's insurmountable debt upon insurmountable debt. And the only way you can fix it is to opt into another system and start building within that new system, which is Bitcoin, which is an equity-based system as opposed to a debt-based system. And so one of the chapters in this book, or meditations in this book, we capitalize on this and showcase how, in the same way, we can't fix ourselves. In the same way, us as Bitcoiners, we're always trying to do the next big. We're trying to take cold baths, cut out seed oils. We're trying to eat only meat. You know, we've got all these like self-improvement tools where we're trying to make ourselves better people and more healthy people and all these things. And at the same time, I think where this intersects with Christianity is Christianity says no one can fix themselves. Every other religion is basically saying you need to meet this bar to be good enough morally to reach God. You need to do more good things. You need to go to church more. You need to go to mosque more, read more books, pray more, whatever it is, do more giving, and then you'll be good enough to reach God. But Christianity says no one's good enough to reach God. And so the only solution is for God actually to intervene and to step down out of heaven and to come and save us. And so in the same way as we as Bitcoiners understand we can't fix the fiat system from within the system, we need an external system to come fix us. In the same way, it's with our own lives too. We can't fix ourselves. We need God to actually step out of heaven to come and save us. And so that would be maybe one that I would start with. But there's a lot more than that.
It's super interesting. I love that. Jordan, you wanted to end?
Yeah. The one that I always, because again, I'm like, my brain just works this way, is like, all right, what's the lowest common denominator? Like, how do we? And so one of the things when I was a pastor for a couple of years, and then was a missionary, and helping work with the small church in Uruguay for a number of years, even before that. And so one of the things, as I was doing sermon prep, like every week you have to prepare, like a half-hour sermon for people. You read a Bible passage and kind of explain what it means, and then how it applies to people's lives. And so I was reading in the book of Galatians, and near the end, the Apostle Paul, he says that God is not mocked, for what a man sows, that will he also reap. And so he just basically, so I'm sitting there, we've got a lot of new Christians, or even people who aren't yet Christians, who are in our church. And so I'm like, all right, how do I explain this in the simplest way possible? How do I rephrase this? And so the rephrasing that came to my mind was, okay, so God has so hardwired this principle of sowing and reaping into the fabric of the universe that to deny that is to mock God. And so I started trying to think of, like, what are some examples of this sowing and reaping? And so, the Apostle Paul, he talks about that. He talks about working. So there were this group of people that they became Christians, and part of the Christian doctrine is that Jesus is going to, Jesus has risen from the dead. He's ascended into heaven and is there right now. And there comes a point in the future where he's going to return. And so part of the way that some of these people interpreted this, these new Christians, they said, well, listen, if Jesus is coming back, then what are we working for? Like, we should just be, chilling. We should be chilling and, like, telling people, like, about Jesus, and then he'll come back, and then, they're expecting him any day. And so one of the things that the Apostle Paul says to these people who think this way, he's like, no, guys, like, you're trying, the way that you're applying what you think this is saying is wrong. And so he basically tells these guys, if someone isn't willing to work, then neither should they eat. And so I was like thinking about this. I'm like, okay, so what is the logic there? And the logic is that, like, food gives you energy to be able to work. And what's the point of working? It's to be able to serve those around you. And so if the Apostle Paul is saying, if you're not willing to work, then neither should you eat. So if you're not willing to take the energy that's afforded to you by food and steward it into work that serves everybody else, then you shouldn't eat. You're missing the point of why you're eating and why you're getting that energy. And so if you follow this for a long enough time horizon, if somebody isn't willing to work, well, then, they're not going to eat, and then they're going to die. Effectively is kind of like the extreme outworking of this. So again, there's an example of sowing and reaping. And we could go down a bunch of different examples, but kind of the culminating one is in Jesus. So within different faith traditions, you have, they just basically see see God dealing with the problem of sin and the problem of corruption in the world. They see him handling it a few different ways. And so, for example, within Islam, like, sin is not something that needs to be paid for. Allah, in their case, can just forgive sins. He can just kind of papally, like, declare your sins are forgiven. And so within the Christian conception, to borrow a Bitcoin phrase, like, we see that kind of arrangement as more of like a fiat, arrangement. Like, there has been, if there's been sin that's been committed, there has to be a corresponding payment for that sin. And so this is how it works within the Christian system, is that, God doesn't just hand wave away our sins. He doesn't say that they're actually not a big deal. I'll forgive you, just don't do it again. He doesn't do that. He actually sends his son to be the sacrifice for our sins. And so Jesus dies in our place. And so this is a proof of work system. It's a closed system that has inputs and outputs. And so this is something that, as I started to look at the monetary systems of the world, the thing that hit me is that every single currency in the world fundamentally denies, like, all these fiat currencies, they deny this principle of sowing and reaping, because there's no real work going into the creation of these different currencies around the world. In the past, if you had a gold or some other commodity-based system, you have to do work on the front end in order to produce money. Like you can't just get gold out of thin air. Like you have to go and pay people to dig it up. You have to pay for tools to do that with. You have to pay for stuff to refine the gold. And so, that's contrasted with fiat currency, which allows governments to take the same piece of paper and put a 100 on it or a 1 on it or a 5 on it and multiply their purchasing power far beyond what would be possible otherwise. And so this idea of sowing and reaping is something that we see all throughout the world and in human existence, and literally thousands of different places. You could plant seeds. You plant a tomato seed, you're going to get tomatoes. You're not going to get an apple tree from a tomato seed. And so we just seeing this principle everywhere. That kind of just came to mind as I was thinking about money. And again, I think this is just a really underappreciated thing that we just haven't thought about a lot and haven't talked about a lot.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. And it's kind of going back to this proof of work concept, which I totally love. I see sometimes Bitcoiners that use low time preference as an excuse to be lazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what the Apostle Paul was talking about in the writing to the church in Thessalonica is, like you shouldn't be using the fact that you have this benefit, the fact that you've believed in Jesus, and he saved you from your sins. This isn't something that you just say, okay, well then now I can just do whatever I want to, like that's not the reason why, we've received this gift. And so I think the same could be said about Bitcoin. Like, it'd be easy to sit back and go, well, I've got Bitcoin. I don't need to tell anybody else about it. It's going to be hard. People are not going to get it. It's going to be annoying. You could use finding this good gift of Bitcoin, this good tool of Bitcoin as an excuse just to ignore everyone else. And obviously there's a middle ground between, going around and fanatically telling everybody at all times about it and, annoying people. But again, I think that you're absolutely right.
It's kind of this, you found Bitcoin and you want to tell everyone. I mean, if I have this, I think there's like some sort of correlation to time. I think in the beginning you're skeptical, then you get into Bitcoin, and once you really get it, you get in the phase where you want to tell people because it broke your mind and you really want to get it out there. But then you realize, oh, okay, it's my environment doesn't react the way that I thought it would react. Like not everyone is all of a sudden jumping and saying like, oh, let's do this Bitcoin thing. And then you say like, oh, like Bitcoin is inevitable, and you just kind of just like orange pilling and educating people that are ready for it, and then it goes down a little bit. And probably similar also with Christianity. Is there an aspect of Bitcoin that doesn't align with Christianity?
Let you take that, Dan.
That's a good question. I haven't really thought of the inverse, to be honest. They're two different things, right? We're comparing apples and oranges in a way, but I mean, the arc of Christianity is that you have the creation of the world, you have the fall of the world. The story of Adam and Eve is famous. We have the redemption of the world through Christ, and then we have the restoration in the end. And I think when people find Bitcoin, they see like, wow, there's actually and this is, I think, the name of the Thank God, or the subtitle of Thank God for Bitcoin is, it's like the restoration of money or something like that. Like, but this is like a new, almost perfect form of money, or a great form of money, best we've ever seen before. And so you see this redemption aspect happening in money, and you start to extrapolate that and start to think like, where else can this happen? Like, can this happen in other areas of society? Can this happen in our education? Can this happen in our governments? Can this happen in my own personal life, in my family, and all kinds of things like that? And so, yeah. Oh yeah. The creation, corruption, redemption.
Yeah.
The redemption of money. Yeah. So that's the subtitle.
Yeah. Dan, and we use that rough framework that Dan just said: creation, corruption, redemption, and then restoration. That's kind of the rough framework for the gospel according to Bitcoin. I think one thing that, again, this, like, one difference obviously is, I mean, with the gospel of Jesus, like, you know, it's, the goal is to take it to every person on earth. And I think the same is true, you know, of Bitcoin to a degree. But like right now, you know, and again, this, I guess everyone on earth doesn't have the same access to Christianity either. But so I guess that is a similarity, but that's kind of what I was going to say. Like, whereas is Bitcoin, like, it requires you having electricity. Like there is like this precondition to having, there's this precondition to being able to appreciate and use Bitcoin. And so maybe there's not the same kind of precondition to, you know, to understand Jesus. Like, kind of God has already made the world to work a certain way that kind of serves as that precursor. So that would be a difference, I guess.
And there are people who like, it's really funny. I woke up Sunday morning and discovered that Max Kaiser retweeted a buddy of mine who was recommending our book, and Max was one of the guys I had in mind when we were writing this thing, because this is written for people who aren't Christians, to help them explain like the similarities and kind of to for lack of a better word, like help them come to know Jesus in a personal way. And so I was really encouraged to see that. But like, he's also said all of these things, like he worships Bitcoin as God. He's literally
Bitcoin is God.
Yeah. Bitcoin is God. Like, that was like a tweet of his, like, from a few months ago. And so I'm just like, oof, like, I'm very thankful that like he's reading this book. I hope he's reading this book because he recommended it. Because he's the target audience in a way. But yeah, it also just shows that Bitcoin is not God. Bitcoin and God are two very different things. Bitcoin is a tool that I believe God has given us to, and I'm so thankful for it. This is why I say thank God for Bitcoin all the time, because it restores my faith in humanity, and it restores my faith in that God wants to give us good things, and actually he wants good things for the people of Earth, and wants us to thrive and prosper, and and have humans flourish. And I believe that can happen on a Bitcoin standard.
Why do you think people compare Bitcoin to God? Or maybe even like, I heard, I had a guest on who was talking about Satoshi Nakamoto is John Nash, and he always referred to him as the Prince of Peace, which I never got so much hate comments on YouTube saying Jesus is the Prince of Peace and stuff like that. Like a lot of them. It's uncommon for me to get so much backlash. So like, why do people go that route of saying Satoshi Nakamoto is the Prince of Peace and like Bitcoin is God? Like, why do you think that?
Well, I would just say, when you see something that is so amazing and so glorious in a way, there is a temptation to want to worship it. We even see examples of this in Scripture. I believe it was John, the Apostle John. He was met by an angel, and the angel was so beautiful and glorious that he actually bowed down and started to worship this thing. And the angel had to stop him. The angel was like, "No, don't worship me. I'm just a messenger. Worship God." And so I think that's potentially what's going on here, because I have such reverence for and such respect for Satoshi and for what he's created. And I think it's just a mind-boggling invention that's going to change the world, and already is changing the world. And so I think there is a natural temptation to want to worship this and make this your everything in your life. Like, what you worship is what you think about going to sleep, is what you dedicate your life to, and all of your thoughts and your actions and your money towards. And so I could see why people would just utterly obsess over it, and because it's so beautiful. But Bitcoin's not there to say, don't worship me, worship God, like the angel. I wish it would.
Yeah, I think another part of it is you have people who, I mean, especially younger people. Like, again, I'm 37. You know, like Dan, you're 40, early 40s. Like, I don't know how old you are, Robin.
I just turned 40.
Like, we're younger people, and like, I mean, things have been dark. Like, things have been dark the last 20 years, and obviously you could keep going back. Like, for a lot of people, things have been dark, and it just seems hopeless in a lot of ways, because like governments are just so corrupt. Like, they're populated and by these older people who just are so disconnected. They're career politicians largely. They have to lie in order to get into office, and so it's just really easy to be cynical and just feel like it's just hopeless to really, like, the possibility of just working hard and making a living in your life being better than your life of your parents. Like, for many of us, it just seems kind of impossible. And so to see Bitcoin something that's rooted in honesty, it's rooted in truth. It's rooted in just publicly displaying, every transaction that's ever existed. Like you can't, BS, you can't BS with it. And so I think for a lot of people, it's the contrast of how amazing Bitcoin is with how dark everything else is. I think for a lot of people, they're finally, it's like this sigh of relief of like, gosh, man, finally there's something that's just, something that's so, uncorruptible, or just, it's so strong and foundational that, I can deal with it without having to worry about these other people. Like, I don't have to depend on, at least theoretically, I don't have to depend on other people in order to use or maintain my Bitcoin. And so I think for a lot of people, it's just been the stark contrast that's been the reason why they're, so tempted to worship it. And like I said, again, but even those terms is something that probably for a lot of you are like, I don't worship things. And really, like this, I mean, if you look at the etymology of the word, worship, it's really the combination of two words. It's worthship. And so to worship something is basically to declare, whether, verbally or just, in terms of your excitedness or whatever, like to declare the worth of something. And so, you could say this thing is worthy of being, worthy of being appreciated, or worthy of being, loved or appreciated. And so I think that, there's a real sense in which there's a healthy sense of that. There's a healthy sense in which, we can, see our parents, in the best case scenarios, or we can see our kids and we can see, and just appreciate their value and their goodness. But again, all of these things, it's not a matter of, is it wrong to appreciate these things? It's just a matter of degrees. It's a matter of, like, what is the hierarchical structure of our loves and of the things that we, the things that we prioritize in our lives. And so I think that's what a lot of us, and a lot of, especially people who aren't coming, they're coming at Bitcoin from maybe a strictly, economic background, or a strictly computer background, programming background, or whatever. If I think this is where all of us can help each other, because I think this subject of the ethics of money production, and the subject of, just ethical reasoning and moral reasoning. I think like this is really a core tenet of Bitcoin, but it's something that most people haven't studied. And so it's not the first thing that comes to mind when they think about Bitcoin. And so again, that's kind of what we want this book to be, is like kind of like a helpful tool in the toolbox that can help you, help people appreciate and think about, the ideas and the ideas and the moral and ethical and in our case, like scriptural principles that actually undergird something that just doesn't necessarily look spiritual. Like when you think about Bitcoin, you don't necessarily, the average person doesn't go, oh yes, spiritual, and so we're just kind of trying to help translate, to help people look at, Bitcoin through our eyes and kind of appreciate why we think the way that we do.
It's also fascinating for me that hope.com is a Bitcoin site like that, because like what you described is also like people get Bitcoin and then they get like this hope again of like the world is so dark, and we're kind of playing that. By the way, I'm 26. So
oh man, look at you.
I'm way too young for the Bitcoin community. I see my I see my statistics on who's my audience, and I have over 50% of my audience above 45 years old.
Wow, let's go.
So the average viewer is around 46, 47 years old. So the average viewer is 21 years older than me.
Wow. You're an old soul, Robin.
I'm an old soul. Yeah. Really cool. Maybe let's get into this because time is just flying very quickly by, and it feels like we just barely touched the topic. For Bitcoiners who are like Max Kaiser, so saying Bitcoin is God, and for others that are maybe just not into religion at all, maybe even like me, who are really into Bitcoin but aren't necessarily extremely into religion, why Christianity? Why should a Bitcoiner go down that rabbit hole?
Why Christianity? That's a great question. I think it's fundamental question of life. You want to know, why am I here? What's my purpose in life? Why do I exist? The first chapter we have in this book, it's called Dear Bitcoiner, and it goes into this it's kind of this obscure part of scripture in the book of Peter, First Peter, where Peter's talking to an audience it's under heavy persecution. So they are living under the Romans, under one of the worst emperors at the time, who was persecuting Christians actively. So he's writing into people who are like seeing their families like killed and displaced, and it's just a really awful environment. And he writes to them, and he says, he talks to them about the end of the world that's coming. He says that everything is going to be eventually burned up in a fire, and we're going to see Jesus come back, and this is kind of the future that's awaiting you. So like the things that you're going through right now, they're not going to last forever, but you're going to see relief. You're going to see an alleviation to the suffering, and all those things are going to come to an end. And then he says this, with an eye at the end of the world, knowing like what's going to come, knowing that there's like going to be a big change in the system and the current regime can't stand, knowing that who ought you to be? He says this phrase, who ought you to be? And so it's interesting because like he's not telling them to, start prepping for the end of the world, collecting water, getting guns, buying land, all that stuff. He's saying, check your character, check who you are as a person. And I think this is a fundamental question in all of our hearts in our lives, is we want to know, you got the chapter there, who we are, and we want to know who, and there's a quote by St. Augustine where he says, let me know you, God, and let me know myself. And I believe Augustine, who is one of the patron saints, one of the biggest figures in Christianity after Jesus, he believed that you couldn't really know God unless you came to know yourself, and you can't really know yourself unless you know God. And so this is basically just an invitation to explore that. It's an invitation to explore knowing yourself better and knowing God better, because you really can't. Can you fully know who you are if you don't know who created you and you don't know the person who created you? And this is what Christianity offers. It offers you a chance to actually connect with your creator in a personal way. And so I would say that's probably the message and why we should want to know God.
I love that.
There's other ways we could express that too, but maybe Jordan, you can get into it.
Yeah, again, I think that so there's a scientist named Dr. Stephen Meyer. He's been on Joe Rogan's podcast. He's done a number of podcasts. He's written a bunch of books, but one of the things he talks about basically, like he's talking about just basically the history of the world and people and where do we come from and all these kind of things. These existential questions, again, they do work themselves out in your lives. Like what you believe about ultimate reality and about why you're here and about, what's going on will necessarily have impacts on how you live. So like there's people who, some of these people, people who are nihilists, like they go on, some of these people who have been nihilists, they go on killing sprees and they kill people because they're like, if this life is all that matters, there's nothing after it, it's just darkness and blackness, well then who cares what we do? And so I think like really, this is just a reality. What you believe about ultimate reality will flesh itself out And there are conceptions of ultimate reality that are more aligned with how the world actually works than others. And so this is something that, again, we live in a day and age where telling people that they're wrong is kind of like the worst thing that you could ever say to someone. Like, it's kind of like, you don't want to offend them. And so a lot of times we avoid conversations about these because we're like, well, in the past, there were wars that were fought over these things. And so we want to avoid wars, we want to avoid people being offended. And obviously there's a healthy degree to which, we shouldn't just pursue every argument for the sake of argument. We shouldn't pursue argumentation for the sake of, people thinking that we're great or for the sake of our own pride and our own glory. But at the same time, like there are reasons why we ought to pursue truth wherever it leads. And so I think that one of the things that's happened is in the last, especially within the Western countries, within the last 100 years, there's things that Christianity is the foundation for much of the Western hemisphere. Like the constitutions and the law codes were built upon the Christian understanding of the way that the world works. And I think what's happened is you have a lot of these countries that, have lost the heart of kind of what we were talking about earlier. They've lost the heart of, why do we do these things? And they're focusing only on what is actually written. And that lack of context leaves them ashamed of some of the things that are written. And so you have this temptation to just despise the faith of our forefathers that founded the countries that we, founded the countries and the freedoms that we take for granted. And so I think part of this thing, when I look at this and I look at the history of fiat currency, it shouldn't surprise anyone. It doesn't surprise me that the most secular moment, arguably in human history, I don't even think it's arguable. Like the most secular moment in human history is corresponding with peak fiat currency. Like when you think about it, it's because again, if value can be created by governments and central bankers out of thin air, then functionally they are the gods of the system. And if they are able to, again, use that money that they create out of thin air to subsidize any idea in the world, they can subsidize it by throwing made up money at it. Then again, you're going to have signal confusion. Like you're going to have a high degree of signal confusion out in the world for what is real and what is true. And so I think that this is something where, again, without even getting into evaluating, like the truthfulness or whatever of these questions, the fact that we live in a world where there is so much legitimate confusion that we should have legitimate sympathy over like questions of what does it mean to be a man, or what does it mean to be a woman, or what does it mean? What is a government? What is money? We have all of these. I talk about this all the time. Like we're in existential crisis. We don't know what anything is because we've rejected broadly. We've rejected the idea that there is some sort of objective standard by which we can know truthfulness. We can know something as being true. And truth isn't just a question of this is my perspective and this is what I think about the world. And so I think that this is a big part of the issues that we have. And so, in this world, in a world where it's very unpopular and, politically incorrect to say, this is the truth and this is false, you have Jesus who comes along with, again, he comes along with a message where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. And so you have, and again, that was a radical message in Jesus's day. Jesus was put to death because he said this message, and there were people who said he's making himself out to be God. And that was what he was doing. He was making himself out to be God. And it was a radical, semi-unhinged, if he's not who he says he is, it's an unhinged thing to say. It's every bit as seemingly unhinged today. And yet that same message, within a couple generations of the first time that Jesus spoke it, Christianity had taken over the Roman Empire. It had unseated the most powerful empire in the world up to that point. And so now it's become, again, you guys are, in countries that were founded by Christians, and, that had where Christianity, the New Testament and the Old Testament had, played huge roles in the formation of the thinking and the rule and the law codes and all these kind of things. So I think that, again, part of this is just, part of the reason people ought to be interested in this is because this is just, it's about learning where you came from. If you live in a Western country, learning more about Christianity is helping you understand more about where you came from. Now, obviously, there's been things that have been done in the name of Christianity or, by governments or whatever who had Christian foundations that weren't aligned with Christianity. I mean, we could we don't need to look very far back in human history to realize that. But that doesn't mean that it's not worth, doing the deep dive and going down and looking at, again, what are the foundational documents here? Like, let's dive into the scriptures and let's look at the history of these things. There's a tremendous amount of value, even from that limited scope, approach. But as Dan was talking about, again, we have been able to avoid deep, difficult, potentially divisive questions for a very long time in the name of pragmatism. Like pragmatism of, hey, listen, we all got to eat, we all got to have money, just give people money and that'll give them peace. Just give them sports, give them, football, that'll bring about peace. And we're coming to the point where those things aren't placating everybody like they were before. Like things are getting hard. You can only deny reality for so long. And so I think that, we're getting to the point where you're having larger and larger stakes, divisions and discussions. And so, again, I think that we're getting to the point where people are recognizing, wait, what you believe about the world actually matters. And we need to figure out what's actually true, because when we just try to pretend like it doesn't actually matter, you get really difficult discussions that really are untenable.
And the short thing that you also, there were a lot of things in there, but two things I got out is also Christianity and responsibility. I love that aspect. I never looked at that way, because Bitcoin also gives you that responsibility. If you screw up your private keys, you will never see those Bitcoin again.
Yeah.
If you send it to a scammer, you never see those Bitcoin again and stuff like that.
Can confirm.
Oh no!
I sent Bitcoin to a scammer when I first got into Bitcoin. Lost
oh really?
I think a tenth of a Bitcoin.
But did he give you 2 back?
That was the promise. Again, I didn't understand any of this. It was the worst. Yeah.
And people get scammed still today with Bitcoin thing. And that's the other thing you said. Like people misuse Christianity, the good name of Christianity, and people misuse the good name of Bitcoin.
Yep.
People are, and I had to deal with that personally, because people want to come on my podcast. They want to promote some kind of scam. Misusing the good name of Bitcoin. I go on the website and then Bitcoin, some money, you go down, and then they're selling something not related to Bitcoin at all. It's just like some weird scam. And I'm like, oh no, sorry. I try to keep the signal here. So there is a lot of scams out there that use a good brand name. And misuse it for their own good, and that's just sad. And it gives you, like Bitcoin and Christianity, it gives you a lot of hope for the world, and kind of this slide where you're going and asking those bigger questions like who am I?
I think again, like it's difficult, right? Because there's value in knowing the truth, but it's difficult to access the truth when you have other values and people pursuing other values that can kind of confuse. Because again, it's just difficult. Like, why would somebody just care about money more than knowing the truth? Why would somebody do that? And it's like, for a lot of people that is unthinkable. They don't do that, but then there's plenty of people where they do. And so it just confuses the signal, and it's difficult for people to understand what's real. So,
are you talking about Trump coin?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. There's a lot of people who are going to associate Bitcoin and think it's ridiculous because of its proximity to Trump and Trump coin. And so, that's, again, we need to be willing to call out scammers wherever they're found, even if we, aren't, even if they're spoken by people who we agree with some of the things that they do.
And I think Trump has a little to no knowledge of the Trump coin. He was recently asked about it, and his question was like, "Oh, did we launch it? How successful is it?" And the reporter was like, "Oh, you made billions." And his answer was like, "Billions, those are peanuts for them." some ridiculous answers like that. I think it's a small project that's maybe occupying 0.01% of his brain, and is run by someone else. Like, I wouldn't it gives him and the administration a little bit of a bad rap for Bitcoiners. To be honest, like that kind of makes it hard to say like, oh, Trump is a Bitcoiner when he does those things. But I wouldn't also overestimate what that means for this administration.
Yeah, it's helpful perspective.
Yeah, and his entire career has been farming out his name to show other projects. Like he sells his name to somebody who's going to make steaks. Like Trump's not there,
Yeah.
checking cows to make sure that they're good quality cows. Yeah, it's just this. It's just him farming out his name and selling it, and he just had no. I don't think he had any concept of how successful this thing was going to be, to the point that somebody tweeted that at least as of the first day, the wallet that Trump held, I believe the value was like $50 billion. So like 20 times his existing net worth he made in one day with this dumb token. So yeah, I don't think he has any conception of the success that it had.
It still has a ridiculous value. It's a market cap of $8 billion. It's still ridiculous. I don't like fully dilute the market cap versus real market cap. I don't know what Binance is here saying, but like it has a market cap of 8 billion and a fully diluted market cap of 40 billion, whatever this means. It obviously is ridiculous. But also it's kind of the free market of like, if you buy a Trump coin, it's your thing. You will probably very, very probably get burned really badly. And that's a lesson for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trump's not all bad. I mean, hey, Ross is walking free today. He was freed yesterday. So
yeah,
you gotta give credit where credit's due. Like he held his promise.
Absolutely, and he put a full pardon on. How do you say it?
Full pardon?
Yeah, he was supposed to just commute his sentence, basically like time served, but he gave him a full pardon, which is beyond what he said he was going to do.
That's great. Yeah,
and then he called out the deep state, which is just
that was nuts. Wild.
Yeah.
And he also is getting out of the World Health Organization and those things. Like I think he does some interesting, really good stuff for America. And I hope that Europe looks at all the good stuff that Trump is doing and kind of takes it to Europe, because I don't always like what the EU is doing. Mostly actually not.
Yeah,
so it'll be fun.
Yeah, it's one of these things where I think Whitney Webb tweeted about this. She said that I guess Trump left the WHO last time he was in office too, but then just like diverted the funds to another vaccine, it was some organization that basically was doing a lot of the same type of things. Like it ended up, it wasn't like they just cold turkey stopped. So, but yeah, I think that it's just following up on, you've got a lot of people, again, the last time Trump was in office, the whole, again, I don't know what we're safe to say for ad purposes for you. So like the events of 2020, the early 2020, I think like people hadn't gone through that yet. And I just think more and more people, like, we just don't trust anybody anymore, which like, again, can be super unhealthy and unhelpful in some ways. But, I think that a lot of people are recognizing like they have to take responsibility for themselves. Like they have to take responsibility for their lives, for what they, what they think and what they believe. And yeah, I just think a lot of people are waking up. I mean, there's scandals in the UK about like these, like different, gangs that were doing things over the course of 20 years. And I think people are waking up there too. So again, I just think this, the awakening of responsibility is going to have it's something that needs to happen, and we see it happening all over the place. I think it could end up resulting in the dilution of the EU within the next 10 years, just given a lot of the forces at play. And again, I think that obviously that's going to have some downsides, but again, people taking responsibility for their own lives and then their own governance, I think is nothing but a good thing.
Absolutely. As we're coming closer to the end, with two people, end routines usually take twice as long. I have one question, and I would like to each ask you that question, actually, that I ask each and every one of my guests, and that is the question of what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin? And I would add with you two, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin and Christianity?
Oh boy.
Who wants to start?
outside of your two favorite topics, what can we learn?
Go for it, Dan.
Is it like, are you looking for personal things like hobbies and stuff like that?
There are two different ways that I see people going about that. The first thing is like something personal that we can learn actually about you as a person. But the other thing that people also go about is like some learning, some things that you got along the way of your life journey that you can share. I have a lot of, I like that question because a lot of people take it a different ways. And I was like, oh, I will keep that. Maybe I'll switch it around a little bit, but I want to get something outside of Bitcoin in the podcast, which is always more difficult when we already have such a huge topic outside of Bitcoin in the podcast like today. But I'm still trying to get maybe something new out.
If you're ready, Jordan, you go ahead. I'm still thinking.
Man. I don't know. I think I would say it's a great question. I would probably say something about, just being a parent. I think that one of the most helpful frameworks for me, just helped me understand and think about Bitcoin, has been through my kids, and just thinking about, just like what it means to be a kid, and just like, what trying to parent and like trying to figure out how to be a good parent, and trying to think about, what does it mean to, to parent well? What does it mean to be a good husband as well? I think like a lot of these things, my understandings of them have been challenged by Bitcoin, and again, just challenged through understanding money more broadly. Yeah. So, I just would recommend it. I would recommend, getting married and having kids, if possible. Obviously, no, not everybody's in the situation where they can. And, we have friends who are married and can't have kids, or, people who want to get married who haven't gotten married. But I think that, I think that we live in a world in which, I don't know, people are, it's made fun of, this idea of having family, and especially starting younger, like of having families, it's kind of made fun of or just trivialized. But I think I see, I've seen just even within the Bitcoin community, like an awakening of people appreciating the value of children, and the value of relationships. And, again, I just think it's been an encouraging thing. And again, it's not that it's easy. Like it's hard, waking up and, living with, other people who have their own wills and have their own desires is difficult, but it's a difficulty that's worth enduring and worth, growing through. So marriage and kids, go for it.
The family unit is kind of so underappreciated. It's something so important, and it's the one thing that sticks with you your whole your life. Like the partners around you, and the family unit in itself. It's something I'm fairly passionate about, even though I'm very young. So like. Obviously, I don't have kids. I'm not married yet. But I'm planning to do those things, definitely.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about something stupid like hockey, but
do it. You get the contrast. You're good.
Well, because like you think about like things that shape your life, like Bitcoin and Christianity have shaped my life tremendously. But like the other big thing would be my family, would be my wife. Actually, funny story. So I get home the other day I was taking my kids out to my two older kids to jujitsu, and my youngest daughter, she wanted to play princess, and so. My wife, she donned her wedding dress for the first time in 13 years since our wedding.
Gosh.
And so I get home and I walk in the door, and I literally was speechless. I just went slack jaw, because I was like, I hadn't seen her wear that since like we literally were walking down the aisle. And I was like, wow. And it just gave me this renewed appreciation for her and for the family that we've created. And I just think, what a gift from God, that the fact that that marriage exists, and she's just been an amazing partner for me, and so thankful for her. And but it's also been like we've also had like we had probably the biggest fights of our entire marriage, like just a few months ago, and it was just the dumbest thing. But and in retrospect, we're both laughing at it now. But it's been a very refining process of like learning how I need to grow as a human, and learn how to communicate better. And you throw in parenting on top of that, and it's just like there's so many possibilities for for things to blow up. But yeah, just it's been an amazing journey with my wife and having a family. I'm so thankful for that. So
Yeah,
that's been
hodl in the same ways you have to endure bear markets in Bitcoin. You have to endure the bear markets of relationships.
Yeah,
like
totally.
there are some dark dark times, and
yeah,
and again, I would just encourage people, don't give
I,
up,
but go for it. It's worth
I
it.
love that the comparison with Hodl, and it's super interesting for me. I mean, I haven't gone through parenting at all, and I think parenting, what I hear from people that have gone through, is the parenting is the biggest challenge, not only in your life but also in your relationship. And it's really the most fascinating thing. What I heard from an uncle was like, they had 3 kids, and they got them quite next to each other, like 2-3 years apart, each kid. And after the last kid was kind of above like 10 years old, he got to know his wife again. He's like, if you have so many kids and you have work, you kind of lose sight of each other, because you're just there for the kids. You're just there to provide for the house, for the work and everything like that. So there's a lot of challenging parts, I think, for a marriage, from the beginning till the end. And I think hodling through that is really something remarkable. And it always is amazing to see, if you see like online people that have been together for like 70 years, or even like my dad and mom, who are like there for like 50 years together and stuff like that. Is like so inspiring. That's kind of the end goal. That if you achieve that in life, you really like achieved something beautiful. I think, at least.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where, again, you always want to imagine like the worst. I'm sure there's people who are listening who have like the worst story you can possibly imagine, and like we're not trying to idealize this thing or just act like if you're a bad person. Like if you have a story that involves divorce or something like that. Like we're not trying to trivialize any of those things. Like we totally get it. So yeah, just that little provision. I just wanted to add that.
That's very important. Yeah, I myself, my parents are divorced, so
yeah. Again, like
I'm a kid of divorced.
100%. And so again, I think that's the other thing you just appreciate is, it's really easy to judge your own parents. Like even if they were great parents, it's easy to just focus on the difficult things. But then having your own kids, you're like, oh dang, like there's a lot that goes to it, and it just gives you an appreciation. Again, no matter what the situation, like I've got really close friends whose parents are divorced, and again, there still are things that you can appreciate. Even if things ended badly, like again, just realizing that, even whether or not you have parents or not, there's people who are raised by their grandparents, and just whoever raised you, like there's a lot of just difficulty and self-denial, involved in raising other people. And so, if you have people in your life who have been willing to, put themselves through that, and to varying degrees of success, it's something that you can be grateful for. And I think there's a maturity that produces in you of just, realizing that life is hard. Life is really hard. And we again, it's not an excuse for anybody, but like we just, giving each other grace and being patient with each other in the face of weakness, in the face of trials and all these kind of things is just really important.
It's kind of a hard thing of like, you want to hold on to it, but there are certain situations where it's like, oh, like that's a toxic relationship. That's like something you actually should get out there, and 100%. It's interesting. I want to close that with one more thing, even though we're getting really long. But do you have? You're both married, I presume.
Mm-hmm.
Both kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Do you have any tips for younger guys like me that are just starting out on that journey of probably getting married quite soon, in like the next few years, going onto this journey as a Bitcoiner and all those things? Do you have any tips?
I know if you have the chance to go through any kind of like premarital counseling, if you're like getting ready for that, I would highly suggest it, especially with someone you trust, someone who's like got a good marriage. for us, it was the pastor who married my wife and I went through that with us. One of the things he really emphasized that stuck with me was just this emphasis on like taking your expectations and throwing them out the window. If you if you throw your expectations out the window and your fiance, future spouse takes their expectations and throws them out the window, then you come together and just let your relationship be what it becomes, and you put the other person first. It can just be a beautiful thing. But if you've got all these expectations, like she's going to fulfill me in these certain ways, and like she's going to always cook all the meals, I don't know what it is, like those things should really be come through like, you should make agreements on those things through mutual understanding and not by your own expectations walking into it. And so I would probably say that, yeah, throw your expectations out the window.
I thought when you started the sentence, I thought like you're going to a prenup.
Yeah, I don't recommend prenups. Well, unless you've got like 11 yachts, maybe Seyr would need a prenup. I don't know.
Yeah, I think again, we mentioned like the definitional crisis. Like we don't know what anything is, and I think one of the other things that we don't know what it is either. Again, we all are coming out with different definitions. Like what does marriage even mean? Like what is this thing? Like why does it exist? You know, there's a lot of people who, at least in the United States, like the primary reason they get married is because there's tax advantages, you know, for being married, rather than like they would just live together for years if there weren't tax advantages to getting married. And so I think that what Dan was talking about is just really important. Like, you know, just again, even before you throw them out the window, like examine what they are. Like, you know, what are your beliefs about marriage? Like, what are the purposes? How do you think that it works, and why? You know, what do you do when you come to disagreements? You know, like like these things seem like super trivial and obvious, but you know, it again, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. You know, it's kind of this old, you know, joke about assuming. And so I think that, again, like basically talking about what your expectations are, and then like again finding somebody you trust, who's got a marriage you trust, you know, who can help you think about some of these things. Again, like this makes sense, right? Like when you go to college, if you're going to be a doctor, you go and you study under other doctors. If you're going to be whatever you're going to do, you go to people who are actually experts. Hopefully, you know, you want to go to somebody, you want to go find somebody who's an expert in that field, and then kind of talk to them about this. And so I don't know why it doesn't occur. It didn't occur. I mean, well, we did premarital counseling, but like it didn't occur to me for that reason. It just was something that I knew we should do. But like it makes a ton of sense that you would go to somebody who's got, you know, a healthy marriage, and you'd ask them questions. I think that's something else. Like even beyond when you're married, just finding somebody who you can go to as like a mentor, even if it's not some sort of formal mentorship, you know, relationship. I think just finding somebody who you can go to and ask questions of, because again, there's a lot of things that, you know, I remember just as me being, you know, newly married, like there's stuff that you're like, is this normal? Is this like, you just have no framework for what's normal or not. And so I think that having people, again, throughout history, this has been family, like your family you'd go to when you had questions, like you go to your dad or you go to, you know, your mom or whatever and ask these kind of questions. But just more and more, we don't have that type of closeness with our families. And so, so hopefully it can be your family. And if not, just finding somebody in your life, you know, who you look up to in that respect. Again, the other thing I would mention, you mentioned like if you're a younger guy, the thing would just be like, how are you growing and shaping yourself now in preparing for marriage? Like who are you becoming? Like you're going to attract the type of person that you're becoming, right? So like the question would be like doing an examination, or like what's it called? Dan, what's the word? When you do like an examination of yourself, like an accounting, like taking account for your life or whatever. And like, all right, if I want to attract a person who's disciplined and who's, you know, works hard and who's selfless, you know, like what am I doing to become the type of person that kind of person would be attracted to, you know? So I think that would be something else, is like, just, again, it's just like anything. It's just like you probably, Robin, starting this podcast, right? Like you start podcasting, you probably didn't know a lot about podcasting before you started doing it, but you've learned a lot. Yeah, you've learned a lot over the days, and so you have to fake it until you make it, right? You're going to LARP to a certain point. You're just gonna be out there trying to do this, and so again, that's a large part of what it means to be human, and what it means to be somebody who's going to draw a spouse to you, is just like getting out there and taking responsibility for things, taking responsibility for people, or, serving in some sort of capacity like this. These are things that signal, it's where you're going to find other selfless people. If you go and volunteer for a charity, there might be some other girl who's there who's also volunteering. And that's the kind of person you want to be. You want to ideally marry somebody, marry somebody who has that outlook on the world. They want to serve the world. And so, yeah, I think things like that that might seem obvious to some people, that they're I don't think they're necessarily obvious anymore. I think there's a lot of people who are just trying to figure out, they don't know what to do. So I think that those would be a few recommendations.
I love that a lot. Just one more question that came to my mind.
Keep it going.
Yep.
I hope you have time, because we're like, I think
we're good.
Okay, perfect. How do you look actually at the state being so involved in the marriage thing? Like if it gets to a divorce, like it's super, you said like marrying because of tax reasons. Yeah. Is that something Christian? it should be kind of like more divided, right?
Go for it, Dan.
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Your question is like, should you get married for tax advantage?
No, like reasons? The question is like, how do you look at that? Because the marriage is so coincided with the state. Like it's such a state thing. I don't know how it's in America, but you actually like go to the government and you actually sign a contract. So it's actually official, a partnership in Austria. So there is, I see it sometimes like a free marriage, or how they call it. I don't know the English term of it, where they have the marriage and the celebration and everything in the church, but just don't go to the state and make it official, because they intentionally don't want the state to be involved in love. And then if you do something, there's lawyers involved and stuff like that. Like that kind of part of the marriage is really weird for me, that the state is so involved in the marriage process. This is unnatural for me for some reason.
Yeah. Again, I think this is, it gets back to the same point of like, we're in this definitional crisis. We don't know what things are. And again, we're trying to figure out, like, how do I think about marriage? Like one of the examples I've given a number of times is like, so for example, in Dearborn, Michigan, in the United States, it's this city where there are, the overwhelming majority of people who live there are Muslims. And so because of that, like the society has started to be shaped a certain way. So here's an example. In the majority of the United States, in the U.S. legal system, generally when it comes to like getting custody of kids, like basically in the majority of the cases, the mother gets priority. Like the children will go to the mom, and that's because of a certain understanding of like what children need and things like this. But in Islamic countries, it's the complete opposite. Like when if there is a divorce or something like that, then the father gets priority in getting custody. And again, we can debate about which of these is, we can debate about the legitimacy of this, but both of these things are rooted in an understanding of how the world works and what's best for all parties involved. And so the question is like, what do you do when you have different conceptions within a single country? And so this is something that's being worked out in court cases, because in this area of Michigan, where you have this huge population of Islam, of Muslims. And so to a similar degree, I think like when it comes to this question of marriage and like the state's involvement in it, like again, if you look at like what marriage is, obviously it has implications on the state, but like within Christianity, like it's not a government that creates. It's not a human government that creates a marriage. And this, again, goes back to within Christianity, goes back to, the Garden of Eden. God brings man and woman together. And so, within the Christian tradition, what God has, we say this in most marriages, like what God has joined together, let no man separate. And so basically in the United States, basically the civil government, like recognizes a marriage, but the marriage is basically performed. It's God creating a marriage. So again, if my fiance and I were if we're on a deserted island, we go out on a trip together, and we end up on a deserted island, and there's no other human around. Can we be married? And the answer is yeah, like we totally could, because like God makes marriage, and so we can commit to each other that, and so we're married in the eyes of God, even if there's nobody else around. But in the situation where there are other people and where there are governments around, then signing some sort of certificate where where the government basically says, all right, we recognize this, like that's perfectly legitimate. Now, what we saw in Uruguay when we were there is that many people don't get married in a church at all. Like they'll just go down to the courthouse and and basically that's the only thing that determines whether or not you're married is, if the civil government says that you are. And so again, that from a Christian perspective, that's not a true accounting of what's actually going on in marriage. But given the secular, worldview of the Uruguayan government right now, like I understand why they do it that way. But yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question that I think a lot of people are going to be, asking more and more over the next, few years.
Well, I think like what you're saying is important, Jordan, just because you want to get back to those original definitions. And so for most Christians, we trace the original marriage back to Genesis chapter 2 at the very beginning of the Bible, or the second chapter of the Bible, where God creates humans, and he creates man first. He creates Adam, and then he creates Eve out of a rib in his side, and brings Eve to Adam. And Adam's just thrilled, right? So he just busts into song and starts saying, "Oh, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman because she was formed out of man." And then it says this: it says, "For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." And so this is like a biblical precedent for marriage that existed long before any form of government existed. This is before there was even other people to witness it. It was just like God, Adam, and Eve. And he performed the first marriage and brought them together. And so, yeah, I'll just echo what you're saying. Like, you can go to the courthouse and you can get married, but ultimately, it's that commitment to be one flesh together, to come together as husband and wife that seals you before the eyes of God. And I'm very thankful that there are tax advantages, I will say, to that, and that we live in a society that recognizes marriage, because it is kind of just, it's just nice to not have to go around and explain to everyone, oh yeah, so this is this person that's very close to me, like kind of like a friend, but like closer because we live together and we have children together. Like you don't have to explain all that because everyone just knows what marriage is, and so you can run with it. So I'm thankful that the government instituted is honoring of the institution, I should say.
Definitely, it makes it easier. I just asked the question because a lot of Bitcoiners are very critical of the government. So I think it's an interesting thing.
Rightfully
this
so.
concept.
Yeah, and I think again, this is part of the thing we get into a lot, right? Is like my criticism of government, and a lot of libertarians, like they come across as anti-government, right? They come across, it's like, I want to get rid of government, and it's like, no, you don't. Really, what you want to do is you want to get rid. Basically, the government today is like a morbidly obese man. Okay, it's a morbidly obese man where there's actual, like, if you did an X-ray. Okay, there's a much smaller man
inside.
You can see like the bone, like the bone structure. This man was never designed to be as big as he is. He was supposed to be far smaller, and that him being smaller would actually allow him to serve those around him much better than he's able to serve them in his current capacity as a morbidly obese person. And so I think that this is actually a really helpful understanding of government. Like government, was created to serve certain functions. And right now it's taken on far more than that and become far more useless because it's too big to actually, to serve a lot of the things that it was designed to do. And so, but again, this is one of the things where somebody could easily say back to me, well, how do you know that what government's supposed to do? And I would say, exactly. This is like everyone has a standard that they appeal to try to define anything in life. And the question is, do we acknowledge those standards or not? If it's something as simple as, well, the government says so. Well, the government has said, governments have said lots of awful things throughout time that people realize, wait, I shouldn't listen to this. The government wants me to turn in my neighbors, like this, for any one of a number of reasons. Should I do that or not? And so again, it can't just be something as simple as if a law is passed saying that this should be true, then we have to obey it. It's not that simple. But then defining outside of that and having a basis by which to define those things is difficult, right? You got to, that's when things you're not able to keep them as neat and secular and, clean as we might like.
That's amazing. Wow, I have I will just make a hard cut here. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is, and it's an interesting one. It's a family question also, but a different one. If you could give your Bitcoin, if you couldn't give your Bitcoin to your family when you die, who would you give it to?
That's a great question.
To my family, I'd probably donate it to my ministry or to my church, assuming they had instructions on like how to take care of it properly, because they wouldn't right now.
Yeah, it'd be the same answer. Probably my church. If I couldn't give it to somebody who was related to, it'd probably be again a church or another ministry.
You should first have to orange pill them so they can handle the Bitcoins.
Crazy story. In my case, my pastors owned Bitcoin before I did. So like nice. Our pastors, they've been Bitcoiners since I think 2016 or 2017.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel, Dan, and Jordan for being on my show. It was really cool. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to Thank God for Bitcoin?
Yeah, so for me, you can find me on Twitter X at hodling Jesus. That's where I spend most of my time. I also have a Nostr account. You can find the link through X, I guess, for my Nostr account. I'm a little bit less active on there. I need to get more active on Nostr, but you can find me there. And you can buy, check out the book on Amazon, wherever books are sold, The Gospel According to Bitcoin, 21 Meditations. And we'd love reviews. We only have one review right now, so it's early days. We'd love some more reviews. Yeah,
and then again, I know we talked about this, I think before we got on the podcast, but we're actually in the middle of, we have Samuel Coleman, who's a Swiss politician, is actually in the middle of translating the Gospel According to Bitcoin into German right now. So hopefully, you guys can benefit from that. You can find TGFB at tgfb.com. We are in the middle of updating our website right now. I'm using ChatGPT. I had Paul Miller formerly of Mutiny. Paul we hopped on a call for like 5 hours, and he helped me learn to code with ChatGPT and like screenshots and all this kind of stuff. It's incredible what you can do. So we're doing that, but you can find us there. You can also find me on Twitter at, I refuse to call it X, Twitter at JM Bush Writes, WRITES. And then you can find me on Nostr at Jordan, I think Jordan Bush or JM Bush as well.
Perfect.
Again, Robin, thanks for having us on, man.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. This has been really fun. It was
really cool. Thank you so much for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is listening and watching, for taking the time and joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.